The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant hum of buzzing fluorescent lights. The door to the shelter creaked open slowly, and in stepped a man who looked like he had carried the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. His uniform was gone, replaced by a plain flannel shirt and worn-out jeans, but everything about him still echoed discipline and sorrow. His right leg dragged just slightly behind him, a quiet limp that told more truth than any words ever could. He didn't make eye contact with the receptionist, nor did he speak. He simply gave a short nod and made his way past the front desk, guided by nothing more than an instinct, or maybe desperation. This wasn't his first time walking into unfamiliar territory, but unlike the battlefield, there were no loud explosions. Here, just the silent ghosts of pain, his and others. The hallway walls were lined with photographs of happy adoptions, dogs with bright eyes and grinning families. He paused at none of them. His footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as he reached a metal door marked Canine Isolation, No Public Access. Without asking, he pushed it open. Inside, the room felt different. The temperature seemed colder, the smell of disinfectant stronger. Rows of kennels lined the wall, but only one end of the corridor was occupied, and that's where he stopped. The inner monologue was soft, like a whisper that only he could hear. I wasn't looking to save anything. I was just trying to breathe. He lowered himself onto the ground, ignoring the pain in his leg. He sat still, letting his body blend into the quiet chaos around him. No introductions, no expectations. Just a broken man walking into a place filled with broken souls. In the far left kennel, 3 pairs of eyes glinted through the darkness, barely visible under a worn gray blanket. The canine puppies didn't bark. They didn't wag their tails. They didn't even move. Their small bodies trembled under the blanket, their breathing shallow and fast. These weren't ordinary shelter dogs. These were the forgotten remnants of a failed training program. Too sensitive, too fearful, too broken to serve. When the man's shadow stretched across their kennel, they reacted not with curiosity, but pure terror. One let out a low growl, more of a warning than a threat. Another whimpered softly, the kind of sound that speaks of long nights without comfort. Their eyes darted, seeking escape, but there was nowhere to run. A young shelter volunteer, Emily, cautiously approached from behind. "They came in 3 weeks ago," she whispered, her tone carrying the exhaustion of failed attempts. "We've tried everything. Food, toys, even professional handlers. They bite, they hide, they flinch at every sound." Her voice cracked. "They've never known gentleness. Just commands, shock collars, and punishment. They're military. Dropouts, traumatized beyond what we've seen before." The man said nothing. He simply watched them, his eyes fixed on the smallest of the 3, a black-furred pup with a scar just above her left eye. She watched him too, but from behind the others. He could see it in her gaze. Not aggression, not defiance, but confusion. As if she were asking why he wasn't shouting or towering over them, why he hadn't moved. A heavy silence hung between the kennel bars, the puppies, the shelter worker, and the vet, all waiting. Not for a miracle, but maybe just for something different. The puppies weren't snarling now. They were still trembling, but they were watching. For the first time in weeks, they were watching. The silence of the kennel was a fragile veil, one easily torn by the memories clawing at the edge of the veteran's mind. He closed his eyes, just for a second, but that second was enough to take him back to the desert sun scorching through his gear, the deafening roar of gunfire, the smell of burning rubber and blood. It was always the same, the mission, the ambush, the final radio calls crackling with panic and prayers. In that flashback, they were all still alive. Manny with his off-key singing, Price with his sarcastic remarks, and Thompson who carried dog treats in his pocket for the bomb-sniffing shepherds. Then came the explosion. Fire swallowed the night. When the dust cleared, silence remained. 1 heartbeat, 2, and then came the screams. And when those faded, he was the only one left breathing. Survivor's guilt, a phrase that sounded clinical, harmless even, until it hollowed you out from the inside. He'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, gripping the sheets like a rifle. The doctors called it PTSD. He called it penance. The army had taken more than his time and his leg. It had taken his peace. The medals they gave him never made eye contact. They didn't know the nights he sat on the floor, back against a cold wall, weaponless, wishing the memories would just stop coming. The barking of a dog on TV, the pop of a car backfiring, even fireworks on the 4th of July, everything was a trigger. Everything pulled him back, and still he refused to cry, not out loud. Real pain, he believed, didn't need witnesses. So when he walked into that shelter, his silence wasn't just from fatigue. It was the quiet of a man who had seen too much and lived through what should have ended him. Coming back home should have been a relief. But what does home mean when the only place you ever felt useful was a war zone? For him, returning to civilian life wasn't coming back. It was landing in a foreign world without a map. People talked fast, smiled too wide, and avoided asking about the limp. They thanked him for his service, then looked uncomfortable if he lingered too long in conversation. He tried everything. The VA had him on medication that dulled his senses, but didn't erase the memories. He went to group therapy, but he couldn't find the words to share. His resume didn't seem to matter. He was either overqualified, underqualified, or too damaged. After his third rejected job interview, he stopped trying. Nights were the worst. Empty apartments echo. Sleep came in. Fits, broken by dreams where he was shouting his brother's names, running through smoke and sand. His phone stayed silent. The few friends he had were ghosts now, either gone or unreachable behind their own walls. One afternoon, after another long stare at his untouched lunch, he found himself in his therapist's office, hands shaking and eyes hollow. Dr. Leland, an old man with tired eyes and a soft voice, handed him a flyer. "Try this," he said. "No pressure. Just see what happens." It was for a volunteer program at a local animal shelter. "Work with animals recovering from trauma," it read. "We're not looking for perfection, just patience." The man almost laughed. What could he offer anyone? He couldn't even fix himself. But something about the word trauma stuck. It felt familiar. It felt honest. So the next morning, he showed up. No expectations, no polished appearance, just a scarred man walking into a place filled with scarred animals. He didn't know it yet, but that was where his healing would finally begin. The shelter wasn't meant for dogs like them. It was a place of second chances, of wagging tails and hopeful eyes. But when the transport van pulled up that rainy afternoon, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. 3 puppies, barely a few months old, were carried in, muzzled, shackled, trembling. Their papers were stamped classified military property, non-operational. They had no names, just ID numbers tattooed on the inside of their ears. The staff had seen abused dogs before, but these were different. They didn't flinch. They froze, not out of trust, but out of pure, conditioned terror. They came from a military canine training facility that was later exposed for pushing young dogs far too hard, far too fast. High-stress simulations, explosive drills, forced obedience through shock collars and isolation. These puppies had never chased balls. They hadn't been cuddled or kissed. They were taught one thing: obey or suffer. And when they couldn't handle it, when their tiny bodies broke under pressure, they were discarded. Shelter staff gave them soft blankets, fresh food, and quiet corners. But nothing worked. No wagging tails, no signs of play. They growled at touch, barked at shadows, and huddled in corners like prisoners. Some staff gave up trying. Others kept a respectful distance. "We can't adopt them out like this," one volunteer had whispered. "They're dangerous and terrified. They don't trust anyone." Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations became meetings. A few staff members began suggesting the unthinkable, that perhaps the most humane option was euthanasia. They were taking up critical space. And if they couldn't be rehabilitated, what was left? No one wanted to say it out loud. But the room grew colder every time someone looked at the kennel. These puppies weren't just broken. They were considered unfixable. And for the first time in a long while, the shelter didn't have hope. It was during one of those hushed hallway conversations that he heard them. The veteran was sitting near the entrance, resting after a quiet hour spent watching the puppies through the bars, just watching. The kind of watching that required nothing in return. The shelter director, Ms. Carla Weston, a woman in her 50s with tired hands and kind but weary eyes, was talking to her assistant just around the corner. She spoke softly, but the weight in her voice was unmistakable. "We've had no progress in 3 weeks," she sighed. "No bites of food unless it's tossed in. No eye contact. No approach. No response to handlers. We've tried scent bonding, voice commands, even pheromone therapy." Her pause was heavy. "I've spoken to the vet. If we don't see improvement by next Friday, we may have to reconsider." Reconsider was the word everyone used when they didn't want to say put them down. That was when the veteran stood up. Limping slightly, he walked around the corner. Carla looked up in surprise. She hadn't noticed him there. He didn't hesitate. His voice was low, but steady. "Let me try." Carla blinked. "I'm sorry," he repeated it. Firmer this time. "Let me try. With the puppies." There was a long silence. "You heard everything?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Enough." Her eyes scanned his face, as if searching for doubt. Instead, she found something else. Not arrogance, not even hope. Just quiet determination. "They've attacked trained handlers," she warned. "I'm not afraid of being bitten," he said. "I've been through worse." Another pause. Then, almost in surrender, she sighed. "All right," she said. "But don't expect anything from them." He looked back down the hallway toward the kennel. "I don't. I just want them to see that someone's still here. It wasn't about saving them. Not yet. It was about being willing to try, when everyone else had stopped." The hallway was silent, save for the soft hum of overhead lights and the distant rustling of leaves outside the windows. The shelter staff had gathered, not because they were hopeful. Most had seen enough failed attempts to bury that luxury, but because something felt different today. The army vet stood before the kennel door, hand hovering just inches from the latch. His breath was steady, his eyes calm. But there was an unmistakable tension in the air, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing. Inside the kennel, the 3 canine puppies immediately noticed the change. Their ears perked up, but not in curiosity, in fear. As the latch clicked and the door creaked open, their growling began in low, guttural tones. Sharp little teeth were bared. Their bodies slinked backward as far as the corner would allow, pressed together in a tight bundle of trembling muscle and panic. The veteran didn't flinch. He stepped inside slowly, not toward them, but just enough to close the door behind him. The sound of metal locking echoed louder than it should have. No one in the hallway dared speak. Carla Weston watched from behind a glass panel, arms folded tightly across her chest. Volunteers held clipboards they no longer read. It wasn't just a kennel visit anymore. It was something else entirely. A silent question hung in the air. Would this be the day something changed, or the final proof that these dogs were too far gone? Inside the kennel, the growling intensified for a moment. The vet didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for them. Instead, he simply lowered himself, slowly and carefully, to the floor. The tension didn't break. It shifted, from fear to waiting. Once seated, the vet did nothing. No commands, no coaxing, no reaching out. He simply sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, palms resting gently on his knees, eyes steady, but soft. For several long minutes, nothing happened. The puppies remained in their corner, pressed together like magnets clinging to safety. Their eyes darted between the man and the door, uncertain which was more dangerous. But the vet remained still, statue-like, yet deeply present. His breathing was rhythmic, grounding. It wasn't silence out of awkwardness. It was silence out of understanding. He'd been in cages too, not with bars and locks, but invisible ones built by memories, loss and pain. He knew what it meant to not trust the hand that fed you. He wasn't here to fix them. He was here to sit in the storm with them. Then, a shift. One of the puppies, a small black-furred one with ears too big for its head, lifted its gaze. It didn't growl, didn't whimper, just stared, watching this strange, unmoving human who didn't seem to want anything. A moment later, it nudged its sibling gently. No movement from the others. But then, it happened. The smallest pup, the runt of the litter, cautiously pushed a paw forward. Then another. It was barely a few inches, but in that tense stillness, it felt like 100 miles. The man didn't react, didn't praise or move, but his eyes glistened slightly. He knew what that step meant. It wasn't just movement. It was trust beginning to stretch its limbs. The puppy stopped again, inches closer now. Its little body trembled, but it didn't. Retreat. Another step. The kind of step a broken soul takes when it decides, just maybe, there's still someone out there worth walking toward. And for the first time, the tension cracked. Not in sound, but in something deeper. Hope. The next morning, before the sun had fully broken over the hills, the veteran returned. Same boots, same silent gait. He checked in at the front desk with a small nod and walked the now familiar hallway. No clipboard, no leash, no expectations. Just a quiet determination painted across his face. The shelter staff barely noticed at first. Many assumed he wouldn't return, but he did, with purpose. He opened the kennel door again and stepped inside. The puppies reacted the same way, retreating, growling, pressing into the corner as if the walls might protect them from whatever humans had done before. He didn't blame them. Like before, he sat down slowly, placing a few small dog treats on the floor beside him. Not close enough to tempt them too quickly, but within sniffing range if they dared. And then, nothing. No words, no commands, just stillness. He became part of the kennel, a fixture, not a force. His breathing was calm, slow, the kind that steadies not just your own heart, but the hearts of those around you. He closed his eyes at times, allowing his presence to blend into the silence. The puppies didn't move that day, but their growls were softer. Their eyes watched him longer. There was no barking, no panic, and when he left after an hour, he did. So quietly, leaving the treats behind untouched. He glanced over his shoulder once, not to see if they had moved, but simply as if saying goodbye was a matter of respect. Later, Carla walked past the kennel and paused. One treat was missing, a small one. It wasn't much, but in trauma, even the smallest gestures mean the world. By the third day, things had changed, but not in ways most people would notice. The puppies still huddled together when the door opened, but their fear wasn't as loud. Their growls were now murmurs, uncertainty softening around the edges. The vet entered with the same patience, placed the treats a bit closer, and lowered himself to the ground. This time, he opened his palm and set it beside him. Nothing threatening, nothing invasive, just a hand, a gesture, an offering. One of the far pups, braver than before, lifted its head. Its eyes were wide, cautious, but not terrified. It sniffed the air, then crawled forward just a few inches. The other two watched closely, almost as if silently begging it to be careful. The little one paused, then stretched its neck forward, nose twitching, and finally gently touched its wet nose to the tip of his fingers. The man didn't react. No sudden praise, no reaching, just a slow exhale, almost a sigh. The puppy pulled back but didn't return to the full safety of the corner. It stayed halfway between the two worlds, fear and curiosity. And then, another surprise. The biggest pup of the group, usually the most defensive, lowered itself to the floor, not in submission, but in cautious acceptance. Its head rested on its paws as it lay down near the vet, eyes fixed on him, not closed, but calmer, watchful. The entire exchange lasted no more than 10 minutes, but in the language of trauma and healing, it screamed volumes. Back at the observation window, Carla Weston whispered to a colleague, "They've never done that before." The other volunteer blinked, stunned. "He didn't even say a word." "He doesn't need to," Carla said, heart full. "They already understand him." By the second week, the kennel was no longer a war zone of snarls and suspicion. It was slowly becoming sacred ground. Each day, the veteran arrived just as the doors opened. Same routine, same silence. And each time, the puppies greeted him with a little less fear and a little more trust. One morning, as he stepped inside, the smallest pup trotted, not crawled, toward him, and sat just a few feet away. Its tail gave one uncertain wag, then another. The man smiled, just a twitch at the corners of his mouth, and laid down his usual handful of treats. This time, they didn't wait. All three pups approached, still cautiously, still slowly, but willingly. The veteran held out his boot slightly, not for any purpose, just resting it forward. The braver pup sniffed it, then, almost bashfully, gave it a quick lick. A flash of vulnerability, a gesture of connection. It was the first time any of them had reached out without fear leading the way. A shelter staff member who happened to be passing by froze mid-step. She stared through the window and whispered, Is that puppy licking his boot?" Inside, the veteran didn't react. He simply sat, a quiet rock in their storm. His breathing remained calm, his posture relaxed. Then came the moment no one had expected so soon. The middle pup, the one that had never made direct contact, crawled into his lap and curled up, not fully asleep, but resting. Trust, physical and emotional, had begun to root. Carla, witnessing it all from the glass, wiped her eyes. Her voice cracked as she turned to the staff beside her. "We've tried every method, every trainer, and he just sits there." The staff member replied softly, "Yeah, but maybe that's all they ever needed." The change wasn't sudden. It was subtle, like the first breeze before a storm, or the first light after a long, endless night. But it was real. One morning, as the veteran sat with the pups, one of the shelter volunteers noticed something unusual. His face, so often blank, distant, unreadable, had softened. His lips curled slightly, just barely, but unmistakably. A smile. It was the first one anyone at the shelter had seen. Carla, watching through the window, stood frozen. She didn't dare interrupt. Something sacred was happening. Later that afternoon, while refilling the puppy's water bowls, the vet lingered by the counter. Carla offered him a cup of coffee. He took it, and after a long pause, he spoke. "You know," he began, voice rough, "one of my boys, he had a dog just like that little one." Carla stayed silent, knowing instinctively not to fill the space. "He didn't make it," the vet added, eyes fixed on the floor. "None of us really did. Not fully." It was the first time he had mentioned anything about his past to anyone at the shelter. From that day on, he talked more, not much, and never loudly. But while sitting with the pups, his voice started to fill the room in soft, slow ripples. He'd tell them stories, not about war, but about fishing with his brother, about the stray cat that used to sneak into his barracks, about a dog named Ghost that saved 3 soldiers from an IED. The puppies would listen, heads tilted, ears perked, not understanding the words, but responding to the cadence, the care, the connection. The man who had once walked through the shelter doors a shell of himself, broken by the weight of invisible wounds, was slowly beginning to return, and it was the soft, unspoken love of 3 broken puppies that was leading him home. As the veteran's presence became routine, the energy in the kennel began to shift. What once was a corner of fear and trembles slowly transformed into a room of cautious play and growing courage. It started with small things, a wagging tail here, a playful nudge there. The little one, who had first stepped forward weeks ago, now trotted up to the vet every morning, tail high, eyes bright. It wasn't the same dog who used to cower in the shadows. This one had hope. The second pup had discovered a love for chasing. Each time the vet gently tossed a crumpled rag or soft toy, it would dart forward, ears flopping, bounding with a clumsy joy that only a young dog can manage. Even the largest pup, once the most guarded, had started to stretch its limbs out comfortably. In the open, its muscles finally relaxing from weeks of tense coiling. They began to play with each other. Low growls, not of fear, but of invitation. A bark here, a leap there. Joy was returning, and then came the moment that made everyone pause. The vet stood to leave one day, his usual hour complete, when the smallest pup followed him to the door, not just out of curiosity, but with purpose. It stood at his heels, then looked up at him as if to say, "Where are we going next?" The shelter staff gasped. "That one hasn't followed anyone. Ever," Carla said, voice shaking. The pup responded to simple commands now. "Sit. Stay. Come." Not perfectly, but with eager effort. The others watched and mimicked, learning not because they were forced, but because they wanted to. And through it all, the bond between man and dog deepened. Invisible, unmeasured, but powerful beyond words. The vet had come to the shelter thinking he was helping them, but in truth, they were saving each other. The evening had settled like a thick blanket over the quiet shelter. Most of the staff had gone home. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows down the hallway. The only sound was the occasional shuffle of paws and the soft sighs of tired dogs resting. The vet, as usual, stayed later than he should have. He had lost track of time again, just sitting there inside the kennel, back against the wall. The puppies curled up beside him. His breathing had grown shallow, but he didn't notice. His mind drifted somewhere between memory and the gentle rhythm of the present. He reached for the treat pouch clipped to his belt, but his hand trembled. A strange tightness gripped his chest. He blinked rapidly. The room spun. Then, without a sound, he collapsed. His body slumped sideways, landing in the middle of the sleeping pups. One jolted awake, sensing the shift. The little one, the first who had ever trusted him, nudged his arm gently. No response. Panic surged through their tiny bodies. They whimpered, circled him, pawed at his chest. The man who had sat silently and patiently with them day after day, the one who had taught them to trust again, he was still, too still, and they knew something was terribly wrong. In that moment, instinct and devotion collided. The smallest puppy, now bold and confident, darted toward the kennel gate. He squeezed through a gap under the chain, the one he had once been too afraid to approach. His paws hit the floor with purpose. He barked, loud, sharp, again and again. He ran toward the back door, nails clicking frantically against the tile. He howled, a sound that echoed with urgency and something else. Desperation. A janitor, just locking up, froze. The sound wasn't ordinary. She followed the noise and found the little dog growling by the staff room door. When she stepped closer, he bolted back toward the kennels, then barked again. She understood. Following the pup, she turned the corner and gasped. There, crumpled in the middle of the kennel, was the vet, pale, unmoving. The other puppies sat beside him, silent and watching, guarding. She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived. Paramedics pushed through the doors as the puppies were ushered aside. But even then, they didn't stray far. The largest one stood at the gate, refusing to lie down. The second paced nervously, and the smallest stayed pressed against the glass window, eyes fixed on the stretcher as it wheeled away. He was there, human now, and they had protected him. The hospital room was silent, filled with the steady beeping of monitors and the faint hiss of oxygen. The vet stirred, groggy and confused. A nurse leaned over him with a gentle smile. "You're lucky," she said softly. "Really lucky." Later, the doctor explained. It was a hidden heart condition, arrhythmia, likely worsened by stress and exhaustion. A silent predator. Most people never know until it's too late. If those dogs hadn't raised the alarm, the doctor said, shaking his head, you wouldn't be here. He didn't speak, just stared out the window, processing the weight of those words. Back at the shelter, the news spread quickly. Carla visited him the next day, her arms full of drawings and notes from the staff, and even a framed photo of the 3 pups curled at his feet. "I thought I was saving them," he whispered, voice cracked with emotion. "Turns out, they saved me." The staff arranged for the puppies to visit once he was stable. When they entered the hospital room, there was no hesitation, no fear, just pure, undeniable recognition. They leapt onto the bed, careful and excited, tails wagging so hard their whole bodies moved. He laughed, really laughed. For the first time in years, healing had come full circle. Not just for them, but for him too. After the hospital ordeal, something profound shifted inside the veteran. The darkness that had once consumed him began to give way to a faint, steady light. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a chance to live, to heal, and to help others. With the doctor's blessing, he returned to the shelter, not as a visitor, this time, but as an official part of the team. The staff welcomed him with open arms. The once broken man now carried a quiet confidence, an unspoken promise to himself and the pups who had saved him. Recognizing the unique bond between trauma, survivors and animals, the shelter director helped him launch a new role, dog behavior specialist. His military background and personal journey gave him a rare insight into the psychology of both dogs and people scarred by conflict. He understood fear, anxiety, and trust on a level few others could. Slowly, he began training other veterans and individuals with PTSD, teaching them how to connect with animals in ways that therapy alone could never reach. The sessions were not just about obedience or commands. They were about rebuilding trust, patience, and hope. Word spread quickly. And what started as a small program soon grew into a beacon of healing for many who thought they were beyond repair. The shelter became a sanctuary not only for dogs but for broken souls yearning for connection. He often said, "These dogs don't judge. They don't ask why you're hurting. They just listen. And sometimes, that's all you need." Meanwhile, the puppies that once trembled in fear found new lives filled with promise. Each one's journey was unique. Some became therapy dogs, trained to comfort veterans, children, and trauma survivors alike. Others found forever homes, their scars fading with every wagging tail and gentle touch. But the smallest puppy, the one who had first dared to step forward, never left the vet's side. They had formed a bond that words couldn't capture. Without hesitation, the vet officially adopted him, naming him Valor, a tribute to courage in the face of fear. Valor became more than a pet. He was a symbol of transformation and resilience. Together, they navigated the challenges of recovery and reinvention, their lives forever intertwined. The shelter's story spread beyond the city, inspiring countless others to believe in second chances for animals and people alike. What began as a desperate act in a quiet kennel blossomed into a powerful movement of healing, hope, and unconditional love. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were unbreakable. As the sun set on the shelter's quiet grounds, the vet sat in his favorite spot, the kennel where it all began. Around him, the once terrified puppies now thrived, their eyes bright, tails wagging freely. The man who had walked in broken, heavy with pain, was no longer the same. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I thought I was saving them, but they saved me." Those words carried the weight of every struggle, every silent moment, every breakthrough. It was a truth that echoed deep in his heart. Healing wasn't a one-way path. It was a bond, a mutual rescue. A gentle montage unfolds, puppies chasing each other across sunlit fields, tumbling with joyful abandon. The vet, laughing as a tiny tongue licks his hand. The smallest puppy, Valor, resting his head on the man's knee with quiet trust. No words are needed here, just pure emotion, the unspoken language of connection and hope. The final message lingers on the screen, simple yet powerful. Sometimes healing comes with a wagging tail and silent trust. If this story touched your heart, remember this. There are countless shelters filled with animals waiting for a second chance, and people waiting to be saved. Support your local shelters. Volunteer, donate, adopt. Share your own stories of healing and hope in the comments below, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life, maybe even yours. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there might just need this reminder today.